At 9 months pregnant, I was preparing for the birth of our first child, excited yet exhausted, when my husband dropped a bombshell. He was leaving, but not for work or an emergency. He was heading to his brother's extravagant wedding, a weekend of lavish parties and celebration, leaving me alone to handle the final stages of pregnancy. I felt utterly abandoned and heartbroken, wondering how his brother's wedding could matter more than our growing family. I'm Linda, and I used to believe I had everything figured out. As the head of marketing, I had a wonderful career, a supportive husband named Mark, and a pleasant lifestyle. I was very proud of myself for being financially independent, as I used my earnings to pay off our mortgage. Family also played an important role in our lives. Tom, Mark's younger brother, and their mother Linda were always around. The boys took excellent care of her because their father had died many years before. To be honest, I found that touching. Seeing how Mark looked out for his family only strengthened my feelings for him. Linda initially seemed to like me. We used to talk over coffee at family gatherings, and she was constantly asking about my job. Marketing, she'd ask, nodding in agreement. It sounds important to get her approval. It felt fantastic. I wanted to become a part of Mark's close-knit family and fit in. Our early married years were filled with spontaneous game nights, extended family holiday meals, and weekend picnics. I recall one Thanksgiving when we were all crammed together around Linda's dining table, giggling and shouting over each other. "Will you pass the gravy from the other end of the table?" Mark's uncle let out a growl. "You have had enough gravy, old man." Linda shot back, but as she turned the boat over, she smiled. I felt as if I belonged. I looked around the table, taking in the familiar faces. And now this was my family too. Linda's house was the site of the first crack at a New Year's Eve party as I restocked my wine glass in the kitchen. Linda was conversing with Mark and Tom in the living room. "Did you see what Carol was wearing?" Linda laughed. "With my hand on the bottle, that dress couldn't have cost more than $5. I froze. Carol, a single mother struggling financially, was Mark's cousin, and she spoke with contempt. Linda went on, "I'm just saying that some people should understand their limitations. If you are unable to keep up, do not attempt to play with the older boys." I blushed from secondhand embarrassment. This was not the kind and welcoming family I had expected. I knew. I looked around the corner and saw Linda leaning in cunningly towards her sons, who were all giggling like elementary school children. Time passed, and I became increasingly uncomfortable in Linda's presence. What I dismissed as light-hearted taunting became much more cruel. Carol was not the only one who was targeted. Linda would cuddle with Mark and Tom at every family gathering, their heads pressed together while they laughed and whispered. Their gaze would move around the room, catching glimpses of various friends and family members, and then they'd giggle quietly. On Easter Sunday, I'd had enough. Linda presided over her subjects in the living room, accompanied by Mark and Tom. "Have you seen Janet's new car?" Linda spoke with a low but not too low voice. "It most likely came from the Buy Here, Pay Here group. She'll probably be paying it off until she's 80. Before I knew it, I was standing up and heading over to Linda's small group. "Hey," I replied, sounding more acerbic than I intended. "Do you think that's a little excessive? Janet can probably hear you." There was silence in the room. Linda's eyes narrowed as she looked up at me. "Well," she murmured. Sarcasm emanated from her voice. "Linda, it appears that we may have offended your delicate sensibilities." Tom and Mark exchanged awkward looks. "I simply think it's impolite," I continued, my heart racing. "Why are you always putting people down?" Linda's phony smile disappeared. "If you don't like it, you don't have to listen. Would you mind taking a seat somewhere else?" I had a slap-like sensation. I looked at Mark, expecting his support, but all he did was look at the ground and say in a strained voice, "Fine," I said. "I will." After that day, getting together with relatives became a different kind of agony. I used to sit alone and sip my drink while Mark clung to his mother. He would occasionally give me remorseful looks, but he would never sit with me. "Why don't you ever stand up to her?" One evening, after a particularly bad dinner, I asked him with a groan. Mark combed through his hair. "Linda is my mother. Which action do you want me to take? Tell her she is being unkind. You should have my back. Please." However, he never did, and I gradually began to find reasons not to attend these family gatherings. Emergencies at work, headaches, anything to avoid the icy stares and whispered comments. Then, just as I thought my life couldn't get any more difficult, another curveball was thrown my way. My heart was pounding as I gave birth to my baby. I looked at the small plastic stick in my bathroom, which had 2 distinct pink lines like a day mark. I yelled, sounding unsteady, "Can you come here?" He came out of the doorway with a worried expression. "What is wrong?" I silently held out the test as he took it from me. His eyes widened. For a split second, I thought everything would be fine. When he drew me into his embrace, perhaps this baby would heal the rifts that had formed between us and bring us closer together. But life had other ideas. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. I was constantly queasy from sickness, vertigo, and the fear of miscarriage. My doctor ordered bed rest, so I had to work from home. My condition worsened over the course of several weeks. My vision began to deteriorate rapidly, an unusual condition that may or may not be permanent. My doctor said it was difficult to squint at my laptop anymore. I had to resign from my job with a heavy heart. More than ever, I needed Mark, but he seemed to be slipping away. He would arrive home late from work, citing extra work or drinks with coworkers as an excuse. I would usually fall asleep by myself and awaken in the middle of the night to the sound of the front door closing. My C-section date came sooner than I had anticipated. The doctors insisted on the operation because my vision had deteriorated so much. Natural childbirth was simply too dangerous. As I lay on the chilly operating table, my heart pounded with a mix of anxiety and excitement. "Where is Mark?" With fear in my voice, I asked the nurse. She smiled at me with empathy. "Dear, your husband is in the waiting area." He expressed a desire to stay after the procedure was completed successfully. I heard my son crying for the first time. The most beautiful sound ever. I was overcome with feelings of affection. Mark appeared in the recovery room shortly after being placed on my chest. His expression was one of anger and discomfort. "Look, Linda, I need to make a statement. The entire situation is incorrect." Perplexed, I blinked. "What do you mean?" He ran his hand through his hair. Frustration is evident in each movement. Normal women give birth naturally without the need for any surgery. And men. We are not supposed to be here for this. We should meet our wives and children at home, just like in the old days. His words hit me like a punch in the gut, Mark. I couldn't risk saving it. He cut me off. "I'm going home. This place gives me the creeps." The following weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings. Mark was rarely at home, and when he was, he did nothing to help us care for our son. Instead, he was constantly complaining. "Can't you shut him up?" He would growl when our baby cried in the middle of the night. I'm trying, but exhaustion weighs heavily on me. He's teething. "Mark, it hurts him." But Mark was not patient with it. "All you do is concentrate on the kid. What about me? What about our sex lives?" I would look at him in disbelief. I was running on only 2 hours of sleep, still recovering from a major surgery. And he was concerned about sex. As the weeks turned to months, Mark's dissatisfaction increased. One evening, I was trying to calm our fussy 6-month-old. He dropped a bombshell. "You need to return to work," he said flatly. I turned to him, shock on my face. "What?" "However, the baby will hire a nanny." He interrupted. "Linda, we can't keep living like this. We need the money." I wanted to argue and tell him that our son needed me, that I wasn't prepared. However, the determined expression in his eyes told me it was pointless. So, with a heavy heart, I began job hunting. It was difficult to find work with my compromised vision. I eventually found a job at a smaller company, but the pay was lower than what I had previously earned. When I informed Mark, his reaction was unsurprisingly negative. "That is it," he scoffed. "We are paying a nanny for this." I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "I am doing my best, Mark. My eyesight makes things difficult. Excuses." He muttered and walked away, and thus began my new reality. Rushing to work every morning, guilt gnawing at me for leaving my baby with the nanny, and struggling through the day with my limited vision. Then I returned home to a resentful husband and a child who needed me. Time flies by, in a haze of work, childcare, and mounting domestic tension. My son was 2 years old before I realized it. Regardless of the challenges, I adored him and rejoiced at each milestone he achieved. However, family gatherings continued to be stressful, owing in large part to Linda's behavior. She'd come in as the doting grandmother for show, but her disinterest was palpable. "Come to Grandma." She'd coo, arms outstretched toward my son, but he'd cling to me. Linda's face darkened in anger as he turned away from this unfamiliar woman. "What have you told him about me?" she would hiss. "You are turning my own grandson against me." I try to explain. My voice is tired. "He simply doesn't know you well, Linda. If you came more often, don't blame it on me." She'd snap and stomp off to complain to Mark. Then, one ordinary Tuesday morning, my world shifted again. My heart raced as I looked at the pregnancy test in my hand. I was pregnant again. Fear gripped me. My first pregnancy had been extremely difficult. My health has been severely compromised. Could my body handle another? However, as I calculated the weeks, I realized I was already well into the first trimester. The decision seemed to have been made for me with shaking hands. I phoned Mark at work. "What is it?" he responded, his tone impatient. "Mark, I am pregnant." There was a long pause then. "Look, Linda, I'm busy. We will talk later. Just don't quit your job, okay? We cannot afford that." The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling as alone as ever. Fortunately, this pregnancy was easier than my first. My morning sickness was manageable, and my vision was stable. I continued to work, determined to provide for my growing family. But as my belly grew, the gap between Mark and me seemed to widen exponentially. He spent more and more time at his mother's house, often arriving home late at night. One evening, as I struggled to put our son to bed while balancing my swollen belly, Mark entered. "Hey," I replied, hoping for some assistance. "Can you read him a story? I am exhausted." Mark looked at us and then at his watch. "Can't. I promised Mom that I'd help her move some furniture. Do not wait." As the door closed behind him, I felt a tear fall down my cheek. I looked at my son. His large eyes trustingly looked up at me and my rounded belly. I was already madly in love with my child. As I approached my 7th month of pregnancy, I found myself preparing for Thanksgiving. Guests began arriving in the afternoon. My parents arrived early. My mother immediately rolled up her sleeves to help in the kitchen. Friends and family trickled in, filling our home with conversation and laughter. Just as I was about to serve dinner, the doorbell rang. It was Tom, Mark's younger brother. He was accompanied by a woman, which surprised everyone. "Hello, this is Melissa," Tom exclaimed, beaming. "My fiancée." After a brief silence, the room erupted. "Congratulations." I forced a smile, ignoring the twinge of jealousy I felt as I saw Mark's eyes light up at the sight of his brother's happiness. Linda arrived shortly after, her eyes widening as she noticed Melissa. "Well, well," she said, her voice full of approval. "Aren't you beautiful to look at?" Linda fawned over Melissa throughout dinner, peppering her with questions and listening to everything she said. I tried to concentrate on being a good hostess, but I couldn't stop overhearing their conversation. "So, Melissa," Linda said loudly, ensuring that everyone heard, "Tom tells me you are a manager at National Bank. How prestigious." Melissa nodded, appearing slightly uncomfortable. "Yes, I've been there for approximately 5 years." Linda beams. "You must be doing extremely well for yourself, unlike some people who can only produce babies and perpetuate poverty," she continued, casting a pointed glance in my direction. I felt my cheeks burn from humiliation. My mother tensed beside me, ready to speak up, but I silently placed a hand on her arm, pleading with her not to cause a scene. "You understand," Linda continued, her tone sickeningly sweet. "Melissa here earns $155,000 per month. That is the kind of daughter-in-law I have always wanted. Smart, beautiful, and successful." Tears welled in my eyes as I remembered the years I'd spent supporting our family, paying the mortgage, creating a career that I was proud of. Everything seemed to be forgotten now. "I believe we should continue this lovely evening somewhere more appropriate," Linda announced, standing up. "Melissa, why don't we all go to the new restaurant downtown? My treat, of course." Before I could comprehend what was happening, Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa were approaching the door. Mark didn't even look back at me as they left. The remaining guests moved uncomfortably in their seats. The festive mood was completely ruined. They excused themselves one by one and left, leaving only my parents. They offered to help me, but I declined, stating that they needed to rest. Finally, alone, I sank onto the couch and let my tears flow freely. Hours passed while I sobbed. My hand rested on my swollen belly, wondering how my life had gotten to this point. It was almost dawn when I heard the front door open. Mark stumbled in, smelling of alcohol and cigar smoke. He didn't say anything as he walked to the bedroom, his hands shaking. I grabbed my phone and opened social media. Linda, Mark, Tom, and Melissa were posing for selfies at an expensive nightclub. The caption reads, "I had the best Thanksgiving ever with my real family." As my due date approached, I experienced a mix of excitement and anxiety. The doctors had scheduled my C-section, insisting that it was the safest option given that it had been less than 3 years since my previous one. I tried to concentrate on getting ready for our new arrival, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Mark. One chilly winter afternoon, I discovered him unpacking bags full of summer clothing. "What exactly is going on here?" I inquired, puzzled. Mark shrugged, barely meeting my gaze. "I just saw a good sale. I thought I'd update my wardrobe." It didn't make sense, but with the impending birth on my mind, I put my suspicions aside. I'd been meticulously saving money in a separate account, intending to take a few months off work to recover and bond with the new baby. My employer had granted 2 months of unpaid leave, which was a relief. I'd budgeted enough for the mortgage, bills, and even a babysitter for our 3-year-old. For once, I felt ready. 3 days before my scheduled C-section, chaos broke out. I was sitting on the couch when Mark burst through the door. "Linda is hot on his heels. Hurry up!" Linda barked as Mark rushed into our bedroom. I struggled to my feet and waddled after them. Mark was throwing clothes into his suitcase, summer clothes he had purchased. "Mark," I said, my voice rising with panic. "What are you doing now?" He barely looked at me. "Tom is getting married in Hawaii. We are all going." The world appeared to tilt beneath my feet. "What? But my C-section is in 3 days. Who will take care of our son?" Mark zipped up his suitcase and met my gaze with cold indifference. "You'll manage. You always do." Before I could respond, he brushed past. Linda ushered him out the door, which slammed shut behind them, leaving me stunned silent. Reality rushed over me like a tidal wave. I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking as I checked our joint account, which was empty. All of the money I had saved was gone. With trembling fingers, I dialed Mark's number. He answered on the last ring. "What?" He snapped the money. I choked out our entire savings. "Where is it?" There was a pause, followed by a cold laugh. "We needed it for Tom's wedding present. Linda, don't be so greedy." The line went dead. A sharp pain pierced my abdomen. I looked down in horror and saw a puddle forming at my feet. My water had broken. Panic overcame me. I couldn't go into labor right now. The risk of my previous C-section scar was too high. I dialed 911 while clutching my phone and placing one hand on my belly. The hospital was chaotic, doctors shouting and machines beeping. I awoke several hours later to the gentle beeping of monitors. My mother's tear-stained face came into view. Linda whispered, squeezing my hand. "You're okay. The baby is fine. Slowly, comma." The fog lifted. I had nearly died. My baby had almost died, but we'd made it 3 days after the emergency cesarean. I felt surprisingly strong, both physically and emotionally. The doctors were pleased with my recovery and cleared me to return home. Mark had not called since he left for Hawaii. Not to see if I was still alive, not to inquire about his new son. At that point, I realized our marriage was over. I called my parents and asked to stay with them for a while. Their response was prompt and supportive. My parents adored both boys, so I had time to rest and recover. I began researching divorce lawyers and gathering financial records. Then, exactly 1 week after I left the hospital, my phone rang. Mark*S name flashed across the screen. I let it go to voicemail twice before responding. "We're on our 3rd call. Where in the hell are you? Why are you not at home?" Mark's voice was angry and confused. I inhaled deeply. "My 2 sons and I are at my parents' house right now. I filed a divorce petition. A startled silence was broken by a burst of laughter. Divorce? Are you joking with me? I became quite angry after everything I had done for you and all of your actions. You know, like giving up on me right before I got pregnant, or stealing our entire savings. We will move on, he mocked. I will reimburse you. Not a problem. I really do not want to see you ever again. Do you understand why? Since I'm going to be wealthy. He went on a rant about how Tom's new wife had promised him a job as her deputy at the bank, how they were going to start their own financial firm, and how she was going to make everyone extremely wealthy. He spat out. You never believed in me, Linda. You consistently dismissed my ideas and hampered me. Guess what, though? You're just a loser who can't see potential right in front of her. And I'm free now. To my amazement, the divorce proceedings moved quickly. Mark raised no objections to anything. In addition to agreeing to pay alimony, he returned the money he had withdrawn from our accounts. I have years of mortgage statements that prove my payment history for the house. The court gave it to me without hesitation. Mark was there, packing up his final few belongings, the day I returned home with the boys. As I entered, my toddler clutched my hand and the newborn was in my arms. He scoffed. Savor this mess as soon as possible, he stated while holding up a package. I'll soon be swimming in cash and living in a mansion. You will discover what has been left behind. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders as he walked out the door. Suddenly, the house appeared brighter and larger. It was 1.5 years since the divorce. My boys and I had discovered our new normal in life. I had returned to work, hoping to strike a balance between motherhood and my job. Although things were not always easy, we were happy, healthy, and thriving. On a typical Tuesday, I received a news alert on my phone. My jaw dropped when I saw the headline. A local banker's family is devastated after he is exposed as a fraud. The story detailed a startling controversy. Melissa, Tom's wife, had been running a sophisticated scam. She persuaded Linda, Tom, and Mark to take out large loans to fund a fictitious financial firm. They had put all of their money into this fictitious business, even taking out a mortgage on Linda's home. Melissa, however, was not a banker at all. The office she had shown them was merely a prop for her grandiose plan of a short-term rental. She vanished along with millions of others, leaving a trail of forged documents and dashed hopes in her wake. Worse, I discovered they had taken out another loan to pay for Tom and Melissa's lavish Hawaiian wedding, the same event Mark had abandoned us for. I felt a variety of emotions as I read on, including surprise, perplexity, and, I'll admit, a small sense of satisfaction. Their creditors took their personal belongings, including Linda's house and cars, which had serious consequences. They were unable to repay their debts and lost everything. All that remained for them were mountains of debt. Linda had to work as a cashier to pay for groceries in her small apartment, I discovered through rumors. Tom and Mark were in similar situations. Their hopes of success and fortune were dashed. I was overjoyed when I got a divorce from Mark at the time, safe and unconcerned about the financial disaster that had befallen my ex-husband's family. Were my kids in me? My phone rang just as I had decided to move on from everything. Linda's phone number flickered across the screen, defying my better judgment. I responded. Linda. Linda spoke in a tiny voice that was very different from her usual stern tone. We require your assistance. She burst into tears, pleading for them to stay with us. She maintained that the children needed their father and grandmother. You cannot abandon troubled family members. I inhaled deeply as memories of my humiliation at Thanksgiving, being abandoned before my C-section, and the countless occasions when they laughed at and ignored me returned. Family? I asked with a firm voice. You abandoned me while pregnant and in danger. You didn't consider my family when you stole my savings. You didn't have family in mind when you called me a loser. You had no regard for my family. Linda started to object, but I silenced her. Linda, I'm sorry that you're in this situation, but I can't hold you, Mark, or Tom responsible for the decisions you made. My children come first, and I will not let them witness the mayhem you have caused.